All right. Hello, everybody. Now that we have looked at job postings and how to find a job that you're interested in, and how to read those job postings for things like keywords, qualifications, preferred qualifications, things like that, the next thing to do is to really start putting together a resume. Now, a little caveat or aside before we start, which is you might have a basic resume that you build and then you tailor it or adjust it to specific jobs. So we're kind of working with both of those things in mind here. One is just building a general resume and one is tailoring it to a specific job. So let's just start with a really simple question, right? Which is, what is a resume? So if you watch that previous video on how to read a posting, you've already sort of, you're thinking about qualifications and, keywords and things like that. So one thing or one error that people will make is just having one resume and just leaving it and not changing it for a specific job. And we're going to kind of talk about why we would change things in the future. But building that basic standard resume is where we're at right now. Now, a resume, according to Wikipedia, just because it was a good definition, a resume, sometimes spelled resume, just without the accents, is a document created and used by a person to present their background, skills, and accomplishments. Resumes can be used for a variety of reasons, but are most often used to secure new employment. A typical resume contains a summary of relevant job experience and education. And we'll look at this as a little bit of a timeline. But, as I say here, a lot of the time a resume is for employment. I've used them in the past for school, right? For, transferring or applying to a different college or whatnot. Or for internships or volunteer opportunities. It really depends. And so depending on that situation is how you would adjust your resume. But overall, at least from our perspective as people creating resumes, the purpose of a resume is to get you an interview. And I think it's important to keep in mind, because of how short the document is, it's usually one page, that I'm not trying to pack everything in. All I'm trying to do is kind of hit the highlights as a sort of a timeline, so that if I am in an interview, if I'm lucky enough, then I can expand on things. I can answer questions about specific jobs or roles or things that I had, and explain those further. I'm not trying to write a novel or my memoir or anything here. I'm just trying to provide the information that shows I'm qualified so that I can get an interview. Now, from an employer sort of standpoint, right, what they're looking for is, what are your qualifications? As we looked at in the job post video, here are the qualifications for that particular job. So an employer wants to be able to skim down your resume and say, oh, this person has the qualifications. They also want to be able to skim down and say, what are your particular experiences and your particular education that might help here? And also it provides a good first impression. A lot of the videos and discussion from the first 3 weeks was how we present ourselves in a professional environment. If there are spelling errors, grammatical errors, mechanical errors in your resume, it's not going to be a good thing, right? It's the first impression. So again, going back to when we kind of talked about tone and voice as kind of a dress code, it would be similar. That is, having errors in your resume would be similar to showing up to a job interview, having not combed or brushed your hair and having your shoes untied and, your clothes rumpled and dirty. So we want to make sure that we're providing that good first impression. Now, this part can be a little bit disheartening, right? Hiring managers typically look at a resume for less than 15 seconds before deciding which pile to put it in. The no pile ends up in the recycle bin, and the yes pile gets a second look and possibly an interview. And if you do a little bit of looking online, This is pretty consistent with hiring managers saying they spend anywhere from 5 seconds to 30 seconds looking at a resume before deciding. Now, again, much like our discussion on how having good writing skills can help you make more money, knowing that hiring managers have a limited amount of time and they're sifting through these resumes relatively quickly, we can then tailor and make sure that our resume is a good fit for our job. Now, more on that in a bit here, but let's kind of stick with this idea for a moment. So here's another one. This one's from Arizona State University. On average, an employer spends 6 to 10 seconds, so slightly different time frame, reading or rather scanning your resume. In that 6 to 10 seconds, you have to convince them that you have the skills and experience to continue the conversation, ideally in an interview. More importantly, employers don't have the time to interpret your skills and experiences. You have to help make that connection for them. So because they're just glancing at this document, part of that means the resume needs to be organized in such a way that they can quickly and easily find that information. It also means they're likely looking for very specific things. If there is a list of required qualifications and they don't scan down your resume and see those qualifications, your resume may go in the no pile, even if you have those qualifications. But if they don't see them, they don't know that they exist, right? Okay, so the other thing, and again, a lot of this is pertaining to hiring managers so that we can begin to understand the context of our audience, right? We talked about this a lot with the email video or the email assignment and email videos is who are we writing for? So we know that the hiring manager only spends, 5 to 20 seconds or whatever it is looking at a specific resume. But we also have to know that they might be scanning more than 100 resumes to fill one position, right? So they only spend a few seconds, and that means we want to make sure that our resume stands out. And little aside, we'll go into this more in a little bit, but avoid what I would call sort of kitschy type things like emojis or flashy graphics and things like that. Even though it might catch their attention, it's probably going to catch their attention in the wrong way because it may not seem professional. So in terms of the specific parts of a resume, now that we know, okay, the hiring manager is only going to spend a couple seconds looking at it, maybe they're very busy people. What are the parts of a resume? So there are some specific chunks, and the exact format may depend on your preference or the job or whatnot, but in general, it's going to look something like this. So you're going to have your name and contact information at the top. That's for a couple reasons, but at least they know how to get a hold of you. The next, and we're going to talk about this in some detail, and it's actually going to be part of a discussion board coming up, is a summary or objectives or career goal section, which kind of explains where you're coming from. Beneath that is usually your experience. So the jobs that you've held and how long that you held those jobs for. So again, this is where it becomes a little bit more of that timeline. And then at the bottom, usually education and skills and maybe references. Now, this is dependent, right? For the job posting that I was showing you all in the previous video, which had to do with education and teaching, I would probably put that education up underneath the summary and before the experience, because that education, such as a college degree or an advanced degree, is part of the requirements for the job. So I want to make sure that that person that's scanning this in 5 to 10 seconds sees that right up at the top and it's not buried down at the bottom. So there are various versions of this, and we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's important to note that there's no standard resume format unless it's a form online that they're having you fill in. So here were a couple examples from the internet, and you can kind of see they're all a little bit different. The font's different, the colors, things like that. The one thing that I will mention, this one in the middle for Michelle Robinson, has a picture. And I would strongly recommend you not include a picture for a resume or CV, at least in the United States. It's not common practice. I know in other countries it is common practice. So if you're coming from a different background, just know that the standard or the convention here, at least in the US, as far as I know, is not to include an image or a picture. Okay, so in terms of that, and this kind of where we'll kind of wrap up this video, this particular video, is to talk about resume builders and resume services. So if you start to Google resumes online, you're going to find a lot of services or software that offer to build a resume for you. Now, there are pros and cons to those things, just as there are pros and cons to using something like these templates that are on Google. So this is just from Google Documents, these templates that you can use. Now, they are a good start, but there are some downsides to using these templates. One is if you're using it, somebody else is using it, which means just aesthetically or visually, your resume is going to look like somebody else's. The other thing is you're going to want to tailor yours to match your preferences and your needs and a specific job. So even though these can be really, really great starting points, don't rely solely on these, right? They're a starting point, kind of a draft point, not your final version, all right? So on that note, I'll go ahead and end here, and we'll pick up looking at more of the parts and significant aspects of resumes that we can kind of iron out. All right. So there you go. If you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all in the future.